Hey everybody, and welcome to Dominion Cards, the video series where we take a strategic, in-depth look at various cards from the board game Dominion. Today we're looking at Corsair. This is a 5-cost action and duration attack from 2nd edition Seaside, and it says +2 coins at the start of your next turn, +1 card. Until then, each other player trashes the first silver or gold they play each turn. So just a quick clarification about duration attacks in general. You can only defend against these with defensive cards like Moat and Lighthouse at the time that the card is actually played, if you want to get the defense. So what you can't do, particularly with Corsair, because it's one where the attack lasts as long as it's in play, you can't play a Lighthouse on your turn after Corsair has already been played and expect it to block the Corsair attack. It won't. Similarly, you can't play your turn, draw a moat into your hand, and then think because you have the moat in hand when the actual trashing effect happens that it will block the Corsair. It won't. These effects only work if they are active at the time the cards are played. They do say on them when an attack is played, so that's really important. And this is also true for stuff like Champion as well. The turn you play it, you still might be affected by duration attacks that were played before you had played the Champion. So what is Corsair? Primarily this is a treasure trashing attack. It will trash at most 1 silver or gold from each opponent. Now it's important to note that Corsair does not stack. It doesn't matter how many you've played or how many are in play across all players on the table. Only 1 silver or gold is trashed per turn, right? They all target the same silver or gold, which is the first one that is played. Now, players can choose on their turn the order in which they play their treasures. So if they want to get rid of silvers instead of golds, they can always choose to play a silver before they play any golds. They can also choose, of course, to just not play any of their silvers or golds, which means that they don't actually get them trashed. But of course, this is effectively stopping them from playing those cards, which, even though it's not destroying the cards, does essentially have an attack-like effect, right? They effectively don't get as much money this turn, but they get to make the choice to do that. So when we compare Corsair to more traditional trashing attacks, it's worth noting that Corsair isn't really hunting through their deck to try and find a card that's suitable to trash with the chance of missing a target. The nice thing with Corsair is that if your opponent wants to play a silver or a gold on their turn, it's always going to hit, unless they blocked it with the defense card, right? Corsair doesn't miss as much as more traditional trashing attacks. The disadvantage with Corsair is that it's very limited in how much trashing it gets to do. Most other trashing attacks, they stack, basically. Because of that chance that they can miss, you can just keep playing them again and again on your turn, and they can potentially trash quite a lot in one turn with that. Corsair is also a duration card. This means that you only get to play it at most every other turn. This means that if you want consistent coverage, you are going to need 2 Corsairs. Right, just having 1 means it's only really going to work half the time, at best. So it is really important here as well to notice that when your opponent plays their first silver or gold in their turn, they still manage to play the card successfully, even though it's about to get trashed. What that means is that they still actually get the money from it as well. This doesn't just completely remove the impact of playing the silver or gold. It just gets trashed after they've played it. What this means is that they don't actually experience any real damage from trashing the card on that turn. It's only the next time they shuffle their deck that they're going to have less cards in it as a result, right? It'll be missing from the next shuffle. So, in some extent, you can think that the actual attack effect of Corsair's trashing is delayed. So most of the other trashing cards are going to be hunting through the deck for cards that they've not had a chance to play yet, and then trash them before they get the chance to play them. That's not the case with Corsair. Now, outside of reasons why silvers and golds might be worth points, could be Keep, Theodem, Palace, so on and so forth. Corsair's attack really doesn't have any impact on the last shuffle, right? They still get to play it, and the fact that they put it in the trash really doesn't make any difference most of the time, right? Like, they weren't ever going to shuffle again, so, it doesn't matter that you trash it. So it doesn't really do anything very late. Now, Corsair, because of the way that it's limited to trashing only one card per turn in total, if you can just keep gaining silvers or golds at a faster rate, then it's easy to just overcome the attack, right? All you need is something to get you like 2 silvers, like, I don't know, a weaver or a groom or something, and then, well, they're not stopping you from playing treasures, basically. I mean, you can still grow your deck and like grow the amount of money if you need like treasure payload. In addition to that, sometimes other treasures are available, like platinum or something like collection. Corsair does not affect these, only affects silvers and gold. Coppers as well are always available and are also safe. So effectively, there's always really an alternative to silver and gold, which is copper, but copper's really bad. But sometimes you get actually reasonable alternatives that might even be quite strong, like in the case of platinum. And then, well, who cares that Corsair's trashing silvers and golds, right? Because it can't hit the platinums, so it doesn't matter. Now, as with all treasure attacks, one of the big disadvantages that they have is that sometimes you just aren't playing with treasures. Like, there are other ways to earn money other than having treasures in your deck, and you can just have even games where you end up with no treasures at all in your deck. And of course, at that point, the attack part of Corsair is pretty useless. It's not really a slight on Corsair so much, like specifically, because this is true of every treasure attack, but it is a problem with treasure attack cards. Sometimes they're just not doing anything. Even if a player's need to open with a silver on one of their opening turns to try and get to a 5-cost card early, or whatever, long term it might be that they're not actually looking to add silvers and golds later, and, maybe it doesn't really matter that much if you trash that 1 silver that they have. They just don't really care at that point. So what about what Corsair does for you? We've talked quite a lot about the attack, but it is doing things for the person who plays it as well. Unfortunately, it doesn't really offer you very much. It is basically a terminal silver for you now. On the turn you play, it's just 2 coins. And on the next turn, start of it, you get +1 card. Now, draw is still draw, and that's quite nice. You're not really going to mock it, but this is not very much draw at all. +1 card is pretty rubbish, especially for a card that was terminal. This is what Caravan gives you, but Caravan's a cantrip, right? And it's cheaper. The problem is that this is not that substantially different from Merchant Ship, which is a very, very weak card in Seaside, definitely the weakest one that's left. Just notorious for being bad. Instead of getting 2 coins on the next turn, you get +1 card, which may or may not be better. It really depends on the deck that you've got, but it's not that much different, really, a lot of the time. So this is very little benefit that you're getting for a card that's actually costing you 5, which is a very important cost. We talk about it a lot in these videos, but cards that cost 5 really have to be doing kind of a lot to actually be worth it. It is very, very competitive. There are some very, very good cards that cost 5, and Corsair, really has to compete with all of those, especially because it's a terminal action card as well. So when we put all of these points together, what have we got? Well, Corsair's a very expensive card. The actual attacking benefit, which is the main reason why you get it, is effectively kind of delayed by a shuffle because of the fact that they still get to play the silver and gold and get the benefit from it. So that sort of means that you need Corsair as early as you can. And in fact, if you want consistent coverage, you need 2 copies as early as you can, not just 1. And that's quite an investment for a 5-cost card. And the problem is that playing it yourself isn't very beneficial to you. You're not really improving your deck that much, but you've got to grab 2 copies of it. And, the attack doesn't stack, so there's always a limit to how well it's going to do. It doesn't really trash that many cards each turn. It's only 1. It doesn't hurt them that bad, really. It doesn't stack. You can't ever make it any better. Or you can't work in conjunction with other players in, multiplayer to make it better. And there are many, many ways to work around this attack, such as just gaining more treasures or having other ways of generating money. And the sort of inevitable conclusion of all of these problems is that Corsair's just kind of a weak card. Now, I don't just want this to be only my opinion. I always do research on these videos. This card is fairly new and there's not really that much data yet. Like, people do try and collect data on games that are played on the Dominion.games, and for, other cards, hundreds of thousands of games have been played that they pull data from, but there's really not that many for these new cards. But the problem is that the data that we do currently have for Corsair is really not looking very good for Corsair, unfortunately. Now, again, sample size is low, and this is all new data where people don't necessarily know about this card, and they're just buying it to see how it works. But unfortunately, the data shows that getting Corsairs is pretty bad. The only one, the number of gains with Corsair that's actually good for your win rate is 0. All other amounts of gaining Corsairs tends to result in you losing games, unfortunately. But it's worth noting that while I say this sounds bad, it's not that bad when you look at cards like Pirate Ship, which had absolutely atrocious stats. Not only was Pirate Ship associated with losing, it was really, really badly associated with losing. Just awful, awful numbers on Pirate Ship. And the gain rate of Pirate Ship was terrible. And, the gain rate of Corsair also isn't very good, but it's not 25% of games or something like Pirate Ship was. It's just, rubbish stats for Pirate Ship. So when I say it's weak, it's not the worst card ever, but early impressions have not been very good for Corsair, unfortunately. Okay, so it's weak, but not every weak card is useless, right? Cards can be weak and still have use sometimes. So what are the good sides for Corsair? Well, this is a treasure trashing attack, and all treasure trashing attacks tend to have situations in which it works very, very well. In fact, they can be quite dominating in the right situation. There are certain decks where treasure trashing attacks are incredibly good. The very best case, and this is the same for all of them, tend to be single gain boards with very fast trashing, so all the coppers disappear, and a reliance on needing silvers and golds to actually get anywhere. So the reason why this is so harsh is because a single gain board means that you can't really replace the silvers and golds and, still get anywhere. Losing it is basically just making your deck exactly the same. You can't improve it if you just have to keep buying silver or gold one at a time. And why would you have the reliance on silver and gold? Well, it could be stuff like a lack of other sources of coins and you have no choice. Or maybe it's just stuff like there's no draw either, so really you can't use copper as an alternative because you just can't get the hand size up high enough. It is worth noting that Corsair itself gives money, but it's very, very hard to actually use Corsair as an alternative source of money. Now, Corsair does have situations where it's actually better than other trashing attacks. One of the big ones is when there are no villages at all. So the thing with cards like Pirate Ship were back in the day was that because Pirate Ship could miss a lot, to actually hit the good cards, you had to play a lot of copies of it at once. So you really needed village support, so you could just play 3 or so Pirate Ships every turn. Of course, that doesn't get any better when you actually play multiple copies, and is very reliable at trashing even when you've played only one. It's actually very effective at trashing in certain situations. And the good news is that if you don't need villages, then you can just make this that one terminal action that you play, and you can effectively entirely shut down your opponent's ability to actually improve their deck in terms of its ability to generate money. They basically just can't get anywhere, because if they try and buy silver and gold, it just gets trashed. And so, it doesn't get any better from how it already was. And if they try to take time off to buy a province, then now they're just permanently down money and they can't claw their way back up. However, it is worse than some others in the way that other treasures entirely new to Corsair. If you have something like the 5-cost silvers like Charm or Collection or something, then Corsair just can't do anything. They just don't play silvers or golds, but they still get the money that they need anyway. So it's completely hopeless in situations like that, really. This is not true of other stuff like Pirate Ship and Bandit that are also able to trash those other treasures. And in general, while we say something like a treasure trashing attack, it's weak, the reality is that it's never nice to have your cards get trashed, right? Unless they're terrible ones like curses and coppers or whatever. So usually it's still somewhat a setback for your opponent. You'd rather not have your cards trashed by your opponent if you could. Let's be real here. And even if they can, just regain the silver each turn, the truth is that they still need to spend the resources on a way to regain it back every turn. It's still wasting their time, right? One of the gains from each turn is just spent putting them back to where they were there before. How good is reducing just a single gain every turn? Is that actually better than having to go out of your way to buy a Corsair and the disadvantage of spending the action on a Corsair, which is pretty weak? Not necessarily, but there is still an impact there. Specifically the limit of only trashing one card, and particularly that it's only focusing on silver and gold, which, let's be real, are two of the easiest cards in the game to actually gain in large quantities, mean that Corsair just sort of is pretty ineffective a lot of the time. Any sort of card that can gain multiple cards at once, what you find is silver and gold tend to be the ones. There's a whole bunch of cards that can gain multiple silvers at once. Right, I talked about Groom and Weaver, but there's also stuff like Trader. There's Conquest the event, there's Delve, and so on. Sometimes it's very easy to just gain mass quantities of these, and Corsair just sort of can't really do anything against that. And at the very least, the fact that Corsair is just on the board means that it's still sort of making a bit of a presence, even if nobody is buying it. The reality is that if you're going to go down the route of picking up silvers and golds, your opponent always has the chance to just suddenly dive into getting some Corsairs and effectively trying to make your deck a little bit worse. So just by being on the board, you're already going to start just looking for alternatives. Now, Corsair providing money, but isn't a real alternative. You can't realistically build a deck, mostly of Corsairs. If you wanted to buy a province every turn and the only other source of money is Corsair, what, are you going to get 8 Corsairs? I don't think so, right? Realistically, you are not really getting anywhere from the money with Corsair, although it helps. It's just not that kind of card. It's not like Pirate Ship, for example, where it also provides a lot of money, or Bandit, that's also trying at least to give you golds as well. Corsair sort of isn't actually necessarily providing a counter to itself like some of these other treasure trashing attacks might. Now, when it comes to attack cards, I usually try to give my thoughts on when you play with more players. The truth is that for Corsair, I simply haven't had a chance to play games with more than 2 people. I've played literally 0 games with Corsair that have more than 2 people, so unfortunately I don't really have anywhere nearly as much evidence to back up what I'm about to say here like I did with a lot of the other cards where I've played a lot of games over the years with multiplayer. But, like most attacks, tends to be more impactful as player counts go up, and even though Corsair doesn't stack, which sort of limits this effectiveness somewhat, in theory, still going to be more impactful. Part of the reason why is because only one person needs to play a Corsair per round, and it's a lot easier to get total coverage and basically shut down the use of silver and gold completely if multiple people are getting Corsairs. Right, Corsair's not great if you have to play 2 one every other turn. But if there's multiple people, 3 people that are just trying to play one Corsair, roughly around a shuffle, and it's taken a couple of turns, you may find that a lot of the time there's still a Corsair in play by someone, right? And that means that overall, Corsair is being effective, and the bad effect of having to play your own Corsair is sort of being shared around. But that doesn't really mean, that that's still a good thing for them to do necessarily, but, you may find yourself, you end up in that case. It's a lot easier to justify only having 1 Corsair instead of 2 because Corsair's not doing a lot for you, and it's terminal and it's expensive. So in summary, the reality is that Corsair's just weak, and sadly, it's still better than the card it replaced, so it doesn't matter, but it's pretty bad, sadly. As much as effective as the trashing might be sometimes, it doesn't mean that, it's necessarily the sort of cards that you would rather be trashing, right? It doesn't realistically impact opponents on this shuffle, so you really want to try and get it into play fairly consistently and early as well, so that the attack really has a chance to shine. But this is hard because it's a very expensive card and it's low value for you. In my view, I'd put this card somewhere around about the bottom 10%. That's sort of just a guess estimate at this point. There's no concrete numbers, but, it's Maybe it's a little higher than that. I mean, a bunch of the bad cards all got removed that were near the bottom, but also some right near the top with the second editions. So, how bad are things now? Well, something's got to be down there, and Corsair's sort of in that range. It's still better than stuff like Merchant Ship, right? Merchant Ship's very poor. This card is simply skippable a large chunk of the time. Treasure attacks just don't matter sometimes, and this isn't offering you enough outside of those situations. But in the right circumstances, like a lot of treasure trashing attacks, Corsair can be really, really strong. It can totally dominate games. Like, if you have nothing to do other than play one Corsair each turn and a bunch of treasures, well, you're doing the Corsair playing, but you're not doing the treasure bit, and now what? Right? Like, Corsair really hits these games hard, and you just have to try your best to find anything else at all to do, even if that means trying to build with, like, coppers and then, I don't know, scrambling for duchies or something, right? Like, it can absolutely shut down the right sort of game very hard. But these are weak boards where it does very well. Let's be real. So, that's all I really have to say about Corsair. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to head over to the online client and I'm going to generate some boards with Corsair, and we're going to see how well it does. So here we have Platinum and Colony. Well, immediately that's a bad sign for Corsair that we got Platinum. We also have Potion as well. So what's the deal with this? Well, we got Potion because of Apothecary that makes it very, very easy to have a deck full of coppers and draw them all. So that's also very bad for Corsair. We got Mint that is very, very good at gaining more and more copies of Platinum. And for these sorts of reasons, I'm pretty confident that Corsair is going to be absolutely awful here. Now, interestingly, there is no village. So what does that mean for us? I'd rather not use Apothecary. Like, it would be nice. I really want to mint Platinums with. It really feels like Platinum's good here. I know there is Duke. I wouldn't really go Duchy Duke on a Colony board. And, the use of Platinums. But what I really want to do is just some money. I haven't got a remodel for later. I can turn Platinums into colonies, or if I have some golds, they can go into provinces and so on. So what does this mean? I guess what it means is that I kind of want some way of getting up to Platinum early, and for that I've got stuff like Poacher, I've got Silvers, there's Warehouse. I guess I can remodel estates into Poacher. I don't think piles are running out, so a remodel would be nice for later, so I'm going to remodel probably as an opener and silver. It's going to take a little while to get up to good cards. At the right opportunity, I'm hoping I'll be able to buy a nice mint, to mint a bunch of coppers out of the way. That would be really nice. But I'm going to have some coppers around, and then hopefully eventually I hit Platinum, I can mint a couple, and then it's like remodel tricks for the end. So that's probably what my deck's going to look like. A Warehouse now and then is not so bad for this deck either. Eventually, maybe even a Patrol or a Tactician looks like they might be nice, honestly. But fairly late, like Justers. Maybe Tactician. Yeah, that might be quite nice. Once I've got some green cards, I can imagine this case where that's good. But, this isn't a very good deck, and there's just too many ways to work around Corsair. So even though Corsair could be a nice terminal to play every turn, there's just too many easy ways to skip it. I guess there is a chance that your deck could be vulnerable to Corsair at a very specific time on this game. Like, if your opponent... Well, how does your opponent get thin? They have to mint. Yeah, it is possible to get shut down by Corsair, but I don't think so. Like, you can still use mint to gain a gold and then buy another gold on a turn, and then you're just like pushing past Corsair. So, you can blockade Silvers. I guess you're not really getting blockade though. So, yeah, I think Corsair's bad here, basically. This is not a good Corsair board, I'm afraid. We actually may find it as a case that none of these are good Corsair boards. Let's see. That's sort of my prediction. Maybe we'll get one. So what have we got here? No special setup. We have no village again. There's Artisan and there's Duke on a board that's otherwise unexciting. Interestingly, there is Merchant. Merchant makes Silver have some slightly extra effects in this game, and... that sucks to keep getting them trashed, doesn't it? Is this a single game board? No, there's Artisan and there is extra buy with Tiara. But actually, Corsair's not bad here, thinking about it. Corsair really eliminates your opponent's money. Like, you kind of need silvers and golds here. The problem is that there's no way to get rid of coppers, but there's no way to really draw them either. Like, there's sort of no way to really activate Diplomat outside of Militia. If your opponent militias you, then you could, but so... yeah, there's not really a village. I did forget that Diplomat was technically a village, but there isn't one. There's no easy way to reduce your hand size. For that reason, you might skip Militia. You just do not want to give your opponent Diplomats. But what would they do anyway with Diplomat? I guess they could play Artisan and Corsair. There's not that many terminals. Like, what is there? Militia, Artisan, Corsair, Merchant Ship. Duke seems nice here, actually. I think I would like to do some Duchy Duke thing. There is, like, Secret Passage. There is Tiara with money. Merchants don't feel very good. Wishing Wells are okay, I guess. Well, maybe they're not that great. It would be really nice to do a Duchy thing with Artisans. I would like some. You can get silvers and golds. You know, maybe Militia is fine. I just don't think it's worth going for Diplomats. If your opponent does get a Diplomat, you just stop playing the Militia, and then their Diplomats are awful. There is Corsair to trigger Diplomats as well, actually. So because of that, you might also just not bother with Corsair. It doesn't feel like you can play them consistently, even if you buy them, and your opponent can just like not play the silver or gold on their turn. And like, it's a bit of a sloggy board anyway, so... whatever, and you know, and let's be real here, it'll take a long time until you shuffle again, so it's not like you'd even feel the impact of Corsair that much, like, for a long time. So, you know, there is some value in Corsair here, but it honestly doesn't feel very good. I would much rather, if possible, be playing Artisans, maybe even Militias. You know, if my opponent's not going to get Diplomats, then Militia's also fine here, at least for a bit. I guess it doesn't help that much eventually, but I guess Tiara's no good here either, thinking about it. It's not that great. So yeah, it's some sort of Duchy Duke thing, and I'm not really sure. There's nothing that supports it that much except Artisan, but there's nothing that really supports a provincing strategy either, which is kind of why I'm thinking Duchy Duke's going to be quite nice here. I think this is a dud for Corsair, ultimately. Like, it doesn't feel very nice. Yeah, I don't like Corsair here. I think this is a no. But there's more of an argument for it than there was on the other board, let's put it that way. Okay, deck number 3. No Colony Platinum, but there is Potions, because we've got Apothecary and University. We've got Conspirator straight away. That is a sign that we're not going to be having treasures. And we also got Market as well. The Sentry for trashing. As University for gaining like markets and conspirators. So this is definitely not a board where Corsair has any value whatsoever. We just have other ways of getting money quite reliably. There is an Expand as well. Late game can turn like markets into provinces. It's going to be better than Remodel. You know, we can gain a lot of 5 costs. We can gain sentries and markets. We can expand them into provinces, and we can just get a lot of money here. University still feels nice. I feel like this game goes on for a bit. I don't want that many universities, because what's the draw? Oh, there's patrol for draw. Oh, and university is a village. Yeah, so what am I talking about? You're probably going to get like 3 universities, going to have some patrols. Maybe just 1 or 2, but most of this is going to be cantripping with Conspirator and Market. You do want Sentry early if you can. Your first university gains are going to be with Sentry. You know, there is an argument, would you rather get Sentry before you pick up Potion and get universities? But because universities gain sentries, I'm not so sure about that. I think it's okay to wait a little bit and do a bit of a slow burner here. This seems so effective that I just don't really see the value in Corsair. Like, what's my opponent going to do? Apothecary and money? You know, patrol money? Like, there's no real other strategy here that would work. And if my opponent does try to do that, you could shift into Corsair, but that'd be crazy to do that. I think the university thing's just too good anyway. You know, and you've got, like, Expand to just gain a load of cards later on. You know, you can turn anything, really, into, like, province. So, Remodel not quite as good, but, you know, that's a cheaper alternative to Expand. You're going to have more 5-cost cards. Very easy to get 5 costs here and expand them. You know, and I guess if your opponent does get a bunch of silvers and golds, you can get Corsair, and then you can expand it late, right? But I think realistically, you just ignore Corsair here, right? This wants to be a treasureless kingdom, so why would you ever buy Corsair? It doesn't make any sense on that kingdom. So that's a no. Right, this next one. And we've got potions because there's transmute. Yikes. Probably won't be using that card, I'm guessing. So we've got trashing with steward and bishop as well as transmute, so we're just not going to get transmute, clearly. There's a village with festival. Now, the draw is steward, wishing well, and magnate. Well, those are very poor for draw, especially when the village is festival, which is a stock card. There is charlatan that's giving out treasure coppers. So we've got mill. Bishop is nice later on, possibly. So the big problem here is actually drawing. Now, the reality is that, Corsair gives us a little bit of duration draw, which is nice. Festival Steward is not draw. It feels like the only way that you're drawing is really magnate. And the truth is that it's easy to have some low-value treasures around because of stuff like Charlatan. The big problem is getting your turn started. So the reason why it's hard is because your only village is Festival. And that means that there's barely anything left for Magnate to draw with because, if there's only like 2 coppers, it's no better than Steward, right? Which means if we want to get a big hand size and actually draw with Magnate, we do actually need some duration draw, or we need something like Wishing Well. There is an argument for Corsair just to get the +1 card, but that's pretty bad, right? It's just that some turns you just have a slightly larger hand size, which is kind of what you need for stuff like Magnate, but it doesn't feel good. How much do I really want to go all in on Wishing Wells as a desperate attempt to draw a big hand? Well, long term, what would you be doing? You'd be drawing from Magnate, right? But so what, really? What if it was just like Festival Steward or Festival and you're trying to play some Charlatans, right? Festival Charlatan is already 5 coins that you need. Maybe it's not realistic to actually try and go above province here. And you know what? There is like Bishop to get money with as well, right? Or points, excuse me. Maybe we just go long here, right? We're not actually realistically planning to build over more than 1 province per turn. And we can just do a bunch of bishoping stuff, right? Like we can get festivals and charlatans to earn big money. And then later on, we just bishop a few things. Like I can see us getting some Wishing Wells, maybe. We'll have a steward, at least 1. And because of that, I just don't really see silver or gold really being that useful at all. I guess, we don't even need to open silver because you can open Wishing Well, right? Like, you wouldn't open mill because you're going to be opening steward. Maybe steward silver's better really than Wishing Well, but I think I prefer Wishing Well, honestly. Yeah, and eventually we hit 5 and we get Charlatan and we get like festivals and then we just play with a low hand size, but a lot of it is like festivals and you can play a festival and a steward, you're still back at 5 cards in hand, but you are getting money with festivals, so it's not the worst thing in the world, right? Mill just doesn't seem good here because hand sizes are low, and trashing is pretty good. So yeah, I just don't really see any value with Corsair, unfortunately, because treasures are just pretty bad here. That's just the reality of this board, I think. Charlatan's just a much better money source combined with Festival. Just try and get a load of both of those cards, really, and get a lot of money, I suppose. And you did go long, and you got time because Charlatan, is junker attack. So yeah, I think Corsair's bad there. In some ways it's lucky that it can't trash the curses when they are treasures, like it doesn't target them, which other treasure attacks might, but you still don't really want it anyway. Here's the last kingdom. No special treasures here. There's no platinum colony. What have we got? So there's Sentry to trash. That's really good. There is Ironworks that can gain a bunch of things. Shantytown Cut Purse Secret Passage Tide Pools. Pawn Herbalist. These are not great pulls with Ironworks. There's Century Trashing and there's Nobles as well. Nobles is good for draw. You've got like Shantytown Nobles or Nobles and Nobles, I guess. Your hands aren't going to be very big as a result. Now, the main issue here is what are you doing for money? So you see there's Cut Purse, but how many of them are you going to be able to play, realistically? The other thing is Corsair, and of course Corsair makes it hard to actually play with silver and gold. Now you do have stuff like Ironworks that can gain silvers, so it is possible to overpower Corsair, but Corsair honestly feels all right here. This is not super great for Corsair, but between Cut Purse knocking coppers out of people's hands and Corsair sort of hurting silvers and golds, I actually think Corsair is all right here. You can get thin with like Sentry. You kind of want to get thin with Sentry. This is not a good deck for trying to play with a lot of coppers. Cut Purse sort of hits that too hard. And you just don't really have other sources of money except silver and gold. And while Corsair is not devastating, I think that this board is already very slow. You can slow it down even more because there's like Nobles as an alternative source of points, which is building you the engine. And as a result, you can get the consistent plays of Corsair in. It's also nice that you could run a Tide Pools or two, like a pair of Tide Pools when you've got Corsair like drawing you a little bit at the start of the turn as well. So, yeah, I think actually we did find a kingdom where Corsair was all right. This wasn't a super duper like dominant Corsair board, but this is one where I could imagine picking it up. Like, I just get two, I play them alternately. It's not the worst thing ever to play. All the other terminals aren't really that good, let's be real. And the other sources of money aren't really there. Pawns really no better than copper in this regard here. Yeah, so here we go. We found the slight Corsair kingdom, I guess. But as you can see, Corsair just sort of struggled a bit. And that's just sort of been my experience, unfortunately. Corsair sounds like it's an effective trasher, and then you play with a load of boards, and there's just so many reasons why Corsair just doesn't matter so much, unfortunately. Anyway, thank you for listening. I hope this was useful for you, and I will see you next time. Goodbye.